Hi, I am Ben. I'm a recovering bulimic and compulsive overeater. I weigh and measure 3 meals a day off a gray sheet. I write them down. I commit them to my sponsor, another qualified gray sheet person. I don't eat in between meals no matter what. And it's the most important thing. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because someone that I adore gave me a really blingy 23rd anniversary chip. Last Monday was my 23rd anniversary, so I'm just going to hand it around. Put your mojo on it for me. The mantra that we say is actually pretty much usually enough for me. Like, of course I have a story, and of course that story is full of drama and trash cans and birthday carbohydrates and boxed breakfast food and, just, you guys know the drill. Like, we don't get here because we're sane. Like, we just, like, what I did with food is just like, yeah. And I know most people in this room understand because I've heard pieces of your story. But I gotta tell you, just not to be at the International House of Heroin this morning it's enough. Like, it's just enough. And I can't tell you how often I forget that. Like, I wake up absolutely stark raving mad. And I have to put my feet on the ground and drink some water and take a shower and have some coffee and eat my breakfast before I even feel like maybe my brain's gonna operate in some sort of capacity that I can function like an adult. I wake up, and it's interesting because I have 2 sponsees in another program, and they've started calling me at like 7 in the morning. And I'm like, after 3 or 4 days of it, I just started saying, have you meditated 10 minutes before you picked up the phone? But I also acknowledge to them that I have the same thing. I wake up in the morning with anxiety. The rest of the day doesn't seem so bad, but that burst coming out of sleep is kind of nuts. I grew up in a small farming village in Nebraska. I didn't know what gay meant until I was probably 11 or so, but I knew that I was different and that I related to boys differently than I related to most other people. Like, I related to boys differently than most little boys related to girls. And I knew enough not to talk about it. I knew enough to keep it a secret. And the secret is, it's the secret that'll kill me. I mean, sugar, and don't get me wrong, sugar and starch will kill me. Alcohol will kill me. But the secret is underneath all of that. That sort of isolation, stay away from other people, don't let them know who you are, all that bullshit. It takes more people out than I can count. My mother was a very good Al-Anon. My father was, I think my dad, he stopped drinking, but he stopped drinking because in his 40s, my mom looked at him and he said something like, well, I can stop any time. And she said, oh, can you? And that's all she said. And he stopped. He's like, maybe he would have a beer once every 4 months later in his life. But he was definitely a food addict. He was definitely one of us. My dad died about 150 pounds to 200 pounds overweight. His kidneys had failed him. He had a heart attack. He had 2 forms of cancer. And his body was like, we know now, right? Like, we know if there were 2 of Ben sitting right here, my organs couldn't function very well for very long. Like, that's just the weight takes its toll. Anyway, when I got recovery in this program, I used to go home to visit, and I would peek around the corner of the dining room, and my dad would be in the kitchen playing with my food scale, putting things on the food scale and weighing things. And I just thought it was adorable. And little things like, okay, so the physical allergy is definitely part of my life. Like, the way I found this program was I was 31, so I was 6 years sober in AA, but I was still suicidal. And I had the clarity to share it. Like, I had the clarity to say, I've worked the steps 3 or 4 times, and I'm still crazy, and I want to die. I don't want to live on this planet. And someone came up to me, a woman that I wouldn't know who she was if I saw her. But she came up to me and she goes, you might have this food thing. Why don't you come with me to a meeting on a Wednesday morning? And it was in a publishing house conference room. They let her use the conference room at 7:15 in the morning for this meeting that she had. And so I went to that meeting, and I was there for the hour, and I walked out and I said, there's no way. Like, these people are stark raving mad. I want nothing to do with them. Mm-hmm. And a year later, I was in so much pain. You could have told me to weigh my food and stand on my head in the middle of Times Square before every meal, and I would have done it if I would have thought it was going to give me relief. Mm-hmm. So I went back a year later, and then I was trying to figure out. So I got sober in '87, and I'm 9 years later, so 96, December 4th of 96 was my last binge. I think it was 94. It might have been, 96. It might have been December 4th of 95. It all escapes me. But what happened for me was, it was very gradual. I would get 4 months, and then I would pick up. I would get 3 weeks, and then I would pick up. I would get, finally, after 4 months of abstinence, I got cast in a tour that would give me my equity card and my Screen Actors Guild card, which is all I had wanted from the time I was 7. So I went on this tour. I stayed abstinent on the tour. And then after the tour, I went to Portland on a vacation, and there I had an extra fruit at lunch. And from that extra fruit, just once the boundary was crossed, I spent $30 on frozen carbohydrate the rest of the day. The next day I did the same thing, and then I just got an earlier plane ticket back from Portland because I realized I was going to destroy myself. And if I was going to destroy myself, I would rather be in my own apartment in New York. So I cut the vacation short. I went to, and I can say to you that having picked up in June of whatever year that was, the next 6 months was the hardest of my life because I knew what abstinence could provide, but I couldn't get it back. That it's a kind of hell that I don't wish on anybody. Like, when wait a minute, like, what we do is not easy, and I don't for a minute pretend that it is. So when someone says I have 1 day, I'm like, oh my God, that's such an amazing thing. Like, 1 day is like, for me, the first 6 or 7 days was the worst. The first 6 or 7 days, once I got past that, I knew I could do it. And it really is a daily reprieve. That 6 months, I was temping. I remember being at a morning brunch on a Saturday morning, eating off of everybody else's plate after they had left. I stayed sitting at the table, and I was drinking coffee, and I was eating this person's thing, and then I was eating the leftovers off of that person's plate. And I was having, it was fine. I don't know if the wait staff saw me or not. I didn't care. It doesn't register for me what that was really like. And then I always tell the story. It was very cloudy. It was December 4th. Around the corner from where I lived, there was kind of a dark, dank bodega run by Pakistani men. And we didn't really know each other. Like, he'd seen me. I mean, I was a customer of his. I would go get my morning coffee there, or, when I needed cleaning supplies or something. But this particular Sunday, on about 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, I went and I spent $7 on junk food. I went home, I binged it, and I purged it. and then I went back a half an hour later and I bought $6 or $7 worth of junk food, and then I binged it and I purged it, and I went back a third time and I brought the food up the third time, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey buddy, are you okay?" And there was some embarrassment and recognition and real love that I felt from him, and real kindness, and somehow it shook me up enough. Plus, simultaneously, exactly that day was the first day that I had hemorrhaged from my esophagus because I was throwing up. First time I had blood that I saw. So those two things together, I mean, it was like a perfect convergence of experiences, so that I went home, and people had said, "You're going to have to put on bedroom slippers to get this. You're going to have to put on bedroom slippers to get this." And I'm like, no, I don't have to rest. But the truth is, that moment, that about 5 o'clock on that Sunday afternoon, I called everybody in my calendar that I had scheduled something with for the next week, and I canceled. And then I called the temp agency, that I called the law firm that I was temping for on a long-term assignment, and I told them that I couldn't come in for the week and that I hoped it wouldn't damage my relationship with them, but I had to take care of a personal matter. And I didn't do anything for that week except sleep, weigh and measure, chop and shop, and I went to 3 meetings every day, because in New York at the time, you could go to a 7:15, you could go to a noon, and you could go to an evening meeting every single day.
Wow.
So I did that, and I got it. And that was the last time I binged and purged. I did have to go back to day 1 because I gave a little boy a piece of a vegetable out of my lunch because I didn't know how to tell a 5-year-old boy no. It just seemed, it was beyond comprehension. And then, because anytime I knew I would see this little boy, I'd just bring an extra baggie of vegetables so that I could give without hurting my own abstinence. So the date is April 22nd. Last Monday was my 23rd anniversary. I've told many stories, like the ways in which I could not take care of myself. I had a whole kitchen full of dirty dishes, and I took them into the shower with me because I couldn't function. I honestly remember being baffled. I remember looking at the kitchen and thinking, and my best thinking was to take them into the shower with me so that I could do everything all at once. And I did. And whatever, now it's just a funny story. It's a little crazy. It's whatever. It's a fairly innocuous story. It beats the hell out of eating something out of the garbage bin. I just little stories along the way. I went to my father's funeral. I was on an airplane, and the vegetable I had in the fridge to bring was white, so that head vegetable. The protein was the protein white. It was a white protein, and the fat was from a stick of, creamery. So everything in the bowl, it was a huge bowl, everything in the bowl that I ate on that airplane on the way to the funeral was white. And I remember thinking, oh wow, you'd have to be abstinent to eat this crap. But it was fine. There isn't anything, there are times still, rarely, but there are times when I just don't want to weigh and measure in front of other people. Last night I went to fellowship after my Friday night men's group, and I've gone to fellowship 5 times in the last decade. And I just decided, time to get over it, take your scale, you'll figure it out. And it was fine. There were only 5 of us, so it was kind of, and they were of course very curious, but they all got it. Like when I described how I was with food, they were like, wow, yeah, I think the thing, so the food is actually really kind of dancing up here. Like putting the food on the scale, that form of recovery, if you would have told me what was down here, when I started weighing and measuring no matter what, when I actually, 23 years ago, if you would have told me what was bubbling underneath the surface and what I would have to look at and who I would have to be and the truth that I would have to tell in the most uncomfortable situations, or the times I would have to keep my mouth shut in the most uncomfortable, like if you would have told me all of this stuff, the food is actually, that manifestation of weighing and measuring is kind of surfacey at this point. 23 years later, it's just like, the real stuff is emotional and being telling the truth about who I am wherever I am in a way that doesn't hurt other people. Like, that's not my first concern, but the way in which I present who I am is, if you want to live gracefully in this world, you have to learn how to find graceful words. And what I've realized is karma is not necessarily, karma for me lately has been really instant. So it may not come back from the person or the situation that I'm aggressive or maybe, thank you. So if I'm aggressive or angry or putting bitterness out over here, it may not come back from over here, but it'll come back. Like what I put out in the world definitely shows up somehow. But that's a kind of clarity that, like I said, if I were at the International House of Heroin, I would never see it. It just wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to see it. So thanks for letting me share.